Hi, I'm Michael Noer of Forbes magazine, and I'm here doing a guest video with Salman, the founder of Khan Academy, and we're going to do the history of education from 1680 to 2050.
There you go.
In 10 minutes.
We'll start a little bit later than so I think an interesting place to start, especially kind of given the context that we're in now, is in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Let me draw my timeline here.
Okay.
So let's just say that is the sweep of time. And that arrow shows that we're going to go into the future.
Good. It's better than going backwards.
Exactly, sweep of time. And so I think, if we put, and let's put the century markers in here. So if this is 1800, this is 1800, and then let's say that this is 1900, and then out here this is 2000. So some people know and some people don't know that actually the model that we have of education, that students work together in these age-based cohorts at their same pace, this was not always the case. This is actually something we inherited from the...
And by age-based cohort, for people who may not know those words, that means you're educated by date of manufacturer. So you basically go in 10-year-olds with 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds,
yeah, you get
11-year-olds.
bucketed. I mean, you can imagine almost imagine an assembly line. Let me do that assembly. I'm using yellow too much. You can imagine an assembly line, and there's kind of a bucket that is leaving along the assembly line, and all of the kids who were born between August of they're going to turn 5 by August are going to get thrown into that bucket, and then that bucket is going to move forward at a set pace. And this was all the kids who were turning 6 by August, and these were all the kids that were 7. And then as they move at this set pace, you kind of have at any given point in the assembly line, you have kind of information being delivered at every point, and it's fixed how much time the students have, and what's variable is how well they get them. So some of these students are going to get the information, some of it is just going to go past them, and they keep getting pushed forward. And at some point, you start looking at the product, and you start saying, oh, that's going to be the good product. If you go to the produce analogy, that orange is really good. It's going to get sold at Whole Foods. That one's going to get squeezed for orange juice.
And this is tracking.
This is tracking, and this is what happens.
And they call this the Prussian model.
This is the Prussian model, and it's literally an industrial revolution inspired model,
and it's about as inflexible as a Prussian might be.
As not to pick too much on the Prussians, I guess they're easy to pick on now that
they're very easy
don't
to pick
exist
on.
As
they're
Prussians,
correct
as Prussians anymore. But they were the first people to really bring out this industrial revolution idea of education around the late 1700s, early 1800s. So we could kind of say this area right over here is kind of the Prussian model gets introduced. And I don't want to pick on them completely, because there is actually something very modern and very novel and even egalitarian what they did. I mean, people read into it in different ways. Was it to create tractable citizens and all of that? But it was also the first time that people said, no, we want everyone to get an education.
For free.
For free.
Right.
Before this, education was just like, well, that's just for people who are going to have even they wouldn't call it white-collar jobs, people who are affluent. Everyone else doesn't even need a deep education. The Prussians said, no, we're serious about this. And the only way to economically do it for free was this industrial type of model,
which fit the time as well. I mean,
which fit the time, and it's easy to pick on them now, but I don't think it's a coincidence that Germany, which inherited many of its roots and people from Prussia, ended up being one of the great industrial powers with a very large, and continues to have a very large middle class.
And then somebody comes along by the name of Horace Mann.
Horace Mann, you go to about 1840. And Horace Mann says, well, this is great. This is.
I always think of 1840 that color.
Yeah, it's green. 1840 is green. I don't know how people can think of it otherwise. But and he said, well, this is a good model. This is egalitarian. This is education for everyone. And he introduces it to the United States. And I personally believe he had good intentions there, but there are obviously always side effects around, how much of this was to kind of indoctrinate versus whatever. But I think for the most part, it was an egalitarian view of, look, let's build our middle class.
Well, he's remembered as a great education,
as he deserves to. There are many schools named after Horace Mann. And you fast forward. So so Prussia comes to the U.S. So Prussia goes to the U.S. in 1840, and then by 1870 you actually get to a situation. 1870 is yellow again. In 1870 you get to a situation where public education is actually fairly commonplace in the United States. Although it wasn't. So let me write this down. So this is public education common. Public ed common. But even at that point, it wasn't uniform.
Right.
It was one state would have a different standard, another state would have a different one. Kids would go for different periods of time. They would cover different subjects. And so
city versus country was probably a big
city
thing.
versus country, or even one city versus another city.
Right.
And so the leading university presidents and educators of the time, so this is a problem. We need to standardize this so that we know what we're getting when if these students show up at the university level and or the workforce. And so in 1892, and this is really tends to get lost in history, you had a committee of 10. So let me write this down. So I'll write committee of 10.
Sounds somewhat Orwellian, but there we are.
Somewhat Orwellian, but is literally 10 gentlemen led by the president of Harvard to determine what should happen in those 12 years. So these people are being pushed forward, but what exactly should happen? And it was actually this committee of 10 that decided that it should be 12 years of compulsory education. So if I'm drawing these buckets, it's literally, I need to draw 12 of them. And they're the ones that determined that physics should show up in your junior or senior year of high school, that you should even have this notion of high school, which is different from primary school, that geometry should be taught in 9th or 10th grade.
So this is standardization. This is, we have now a public standardized education, which is great if you want to get people credentials and create a workforce that will be productive and what they should know at least.
Yeah, or if you're even in the admissions department of a university.
Yes.
And it was actually around this time that the state universities also started to get, and so even at the higher education started to become much more ubiquitous at this point in time. And so you need standards. What are the students going to be? And even there, I want to be fair to them, they were actually very forward thinking. They were actually thinking, and the U.S. was on the vanguard here. They said, we want to give everyone a chance at higher order skills. So we're not just going to filter everyone at 8th grade and say, oh, you don't need to learn calculus or algebra. You're going to go work in a factory. They said, hey, everyone should learn this stuff. And that's why everyone now does at least attempt to learn
it was forward looking for 120 years ago. But what is interesting here is that we basically get stuck there for 120 years.
Yes, this is
this is just going to keep going.
It is static to the present day. And one thing I point out in the book in some details, these, for the time, they were relatively forward-looking, but this was a time before interstate highways, vaccines, knowledge of DNA, really TV, mass media, before any of that, before the existence of the Federal Reserve.
And for those of you who are listening and don't know, Sal has a book out. That's what he means by the book, and it's called The One World Schoolhouse. Yes. But the internet happens somewhere in there, right?
The internet happens.
We
could probably put other things here. Radio,
cars,
air conditioners, cars, things
commercial
like
air
that.
flight,
man on the moon.
Right. But let's talk about the internet.
Yes. So you come, mid-late 90s.
Yeah, it's mid-90s.
Mid-90s, internet. So let's do internet in magenta. So let's say the internet is obviously still happening. So that's there. So that's the internet. And for the first time, there's a bunch of things that the internet enabled. Distribution of information, the cost of that goes close to zero. It was now many-to-many distribution. You didn't have to have the gatekeepers of who had the bandwidth that the FCC gave to anyone could now publish. And actually we should probably even go a little bit before the internet. If you go to the late 70s, early 80s, you have the personal computer. Which is,
But the big thing here, I mean, yes, the PC, but what you've done, and I think we should get into the Khan Academy now, is that one person with one computer can reach millions of people, and that revolutionizes the concept of lectures to students and what you should be doing in the school. Typically, what we think of as an education is wise man in front of class speaking, students passively listening, students then going home and then working on that at home and then coming back and being tested at some point.
That's
right.
But
this one-to-many revolution at a very low cost of the internet allows you to do something really remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, what's going on here, hopefully do something remarkable or at least change thinking a little bit, is for all the reasons you just said, we now have the tools where between the PC, broadband, and all the rest, people can have access to information. That information can be processed in real time in a customized way. You no longer have to batch everyone into these buckets. Everyone can now go at their own pace, get feedback at their own pace. And because things like the lectures and a lot of this kind of the problem solving can happen in this way, class time can be liberated. So, just like you said, in the traditional model, if this is class time right over here, so this is the class, this is normally where the lecture, the kind of information delivery happens. And then at the rest of someone's life, in particular at home is where a lot of the kind of the individual problem solving occurs. And so now we're saying, no, look, a lot of what used to happen in class, and actually more than that, can now happen either at home or even on the bus or whatever, and it can happen in a self-paced way. It doesn't have to go at this Prussian, everyone goes at the same pace idea. And what it does in our minds is it frees the class for real interactivity. And I always point this out whenever people talk about the idea of technology generally in education or in the classroom, people imagine kind of a Borg or Vulcan reality of people plugged into these things. But what we're saying is, no, technology is going to make classrooms more human. It's going to make classrooms more interactive.
I think we should talk about that for 2 seconds, about flipping the classroom is the terminology or the jargon that's being used. In other words, you can do this lecture or any other lecture on your computer at home at your own pace until you feel comfortable with it. Or if you're stuck, then the next day you go into class and your teacher will be freed up to interact with you because the lecture will be done at home and the homework will be done at school.
Yeah, and one thing I point out, that's exactly right, but one thing I do point out is we think you can go even beyond what you've described as flipping. We think that is valuable in and of itself, that someone can have access to the lectures at their own time, at their own pace. They don't have to take notes because it's always there for them. They can go back and remediate without having to feel embarrassed in a classroom, and then go back here and do actual problem solving or doing projects or getting peer-to-peer or time with the professor. But we think that is a huge step forward, but you go even further is if you allow everyone to learn at their own pace. So a traditional flipped classroom, you could flip within the Prussian model. So that's completely, and people are doing that. But we say, let's go a step further. Let's actually break these, let's allow these buckets, let's break them into a bunch of, everyone gets their own little bucket, and it goes at a pace that's appropriate to them so that they can literally master concepts and not be kind of promoted to a point where they superficially understand a lot of things and have mastery of nothing.
Great.